My name is Nathan Cole. The night I found out the truth about Claire, I realized love can be just as dangerous as lies. Trust me, you'll regret skipping the story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Ethan's Way. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It began during one of the most exhausting seasons of my life. My mother's health had been failing for months, but that winter, everything seemed to collapse at once. Her heart condition, which we'd been managing for years, suddenly worsened. The doctors used words like critical and time-sensitive procedures. I found myself making choices no son should have to make, weighing bills against my mother's life, wondering which debt collector I could ignore for just a little longer. My days blurred together. I'd wake up early to check emails from clients, spend hours designing ad campaigns and marketing materials, then rush to the hospital for visiting hours. My apartment looked like a storage room, dishes piled in the sink, laundry spilling out of the hamper. Sleep wasn't something I got much of. It was something I caught in snatches, like a thief stealing from my own life. Claire entered my life in the middle of that storm. We met at a coffee shop on a Thursday evening, so drenched in rain that the city seemed to be melting. I was hunched over my laptop, earbuds and fingers flying across the keyboard, trying to finish a project for a particularly demanding client. When I looked up, she was standing there, a woman with warm brown hair pulled back in a loose bun, a stack of photography books in her arms. She glanced around the crowded cafe before asking, "Mind if I share this table? Everywhere else is taken." Her voice was calm, but carried a natural confidence. I gestured to the chair opposite mine without thinking. She smiled, sat down, and started unpacking her books. For the next 20 minutes, we didn't speak. I caught glimpses of her as I worked the way her brow furrowed when she read, the absent way she twisted a pen in her fingers. It was only when I accidentally knocked over my coffee cup, thankfully empty, that we started talking. She laughed lightly and said, "Guess that's one way to take a break." I told her I was a graphic designer working freelance, and she mentioned she was a part-time photographer. The conversation flowed easily after that. Claire came back the next evening, and the one after that. Sometimes she'd bring me a muffin or a small coffee, saying she accidentally ordered too much. She remembered details I'd mentioned in passing a client's name, my preference for black coffee with no sugar, the fact that my mother loved sunflowers. She seemed thoughtful, genuine. And she had this way of looking at me when I spoke like what I was saying mattered. That was rare for me. Most people these days seem too distracted to truly listen. Over the next month, we started seeing each other outside the cafe. Walks through the park, quick lunches when I could get away from work, late night calls where she'd tell me about the frustration of finding clients for her photography. She said she lived in a modest apartment on the other side of town. Her parents, she told me, were comfortably retired but not wealthy, and she wanted to make her own way without leaning on them. I respected that deeply. We were both building something from scratch. But even in those first weeks, there were things that didn't add up. Once I saw her step outside during one of our coffee dates to take a call. Through the window, I noticed her posture change, completely straight-backed, composed, her voice low but crisp. When she came back in, she brushed it off, saying it was just a friend. Another time, she told me she was completely broke and needed to cut back on expenses, yet she was wearing a coat I recognized from a designer catalog. When I asked about it, she laughed and said she'd found it at a thrift store for $10. It was possible. But something in her eyes told me there was more to the story. Still, I pushed those doubts aside. I was too consumed with my own problems. My mother's hospital visits grew more urgent. The doctors recommended a new procedure that wasn't fully covered by insurance, and the bills were stacking like bricks on my chest. Claire knew all of this. She'd listen quietly when I talked about it, nodding with sympathy. Sometimes she'd reach across the table to squeeze my hand and say, "You're doing so well, Nathan. Your mom's lucky to have you." One evening, after a particularly draining day at the hospital, we met at the cafe. I was pale from exhaustion, my head buzzing with numbers from the latest bill. She smiled when she saw me, stood and hugged me tightly. "You're amazing," she murmured. "You're holding it all together." Those words hit me harder than she probably intended. I'd been craving reassurance, and for a brief moment, I believed she truly understood what I was going through. Later that night, I sent her a short message. "Thanks for tonight. I really needed it." Hours passed, no reply. She was online, I could see that, but she didn't respond. Curious, I opened her social media page. There she was smiling in a dimly lit restaurant, a glass of champagne in hand. The caption read, "Sometimes you just have to treat yourself." The place was one of the most expensive dining spots in the city, a place I wouldn't even step into unless someone else was paying. My chest tightened. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. She could have been with a friend, maybe even for work. But the timing was strange. She knew I was struggling. She knew my mom's life was hanging in the balance, and she was out spending money like water. I went to bed that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation we'd had. Little flashes of detail came back to me: the designer jacket, the formal phone call, the way she dodged direct questions about her past. It was like a puzzle I hadn't realized I was assembling. Still, I didn't have enough pieces yet, and maybe deep down I didn't want the full picture. Not yet. Looking back, that rainy Thursday when I met Claire feels like the opening scene of a movie you wish you could stop halfway through, before everything unravels, before you realize the light in the distance is actually a train coming straight for you. And the worst part, I had no idea just how deep the lie went, or how cruel the timing of her test would turn out to be. The next few weeks were a balancing act between survival and exhaustion. I kept my head down, working more hours than I thought my body could handle, just to cover rent and chip away at the growing medical bills. My clients didn't know or care about my situation. All they saw was whether I delivered their projects on time. Claire was still there, drifting in and out of my days like a warm shadow. She'd text me little messages in the morning: "Don't skip breakfast today," or late at night: "Hope you're getting some rest." Words were cheap, but I told myself they mattered. In my weakest moments, I clung to them. But my mother's condition didn't care about optimism. It was a Tuesday when the doctor pulled me aside after his rounds. His face was calm but serious, the kind of expression people use when they know the truth will hurt. "Nathan," he said, "we're running out of time. If we don't schedule the valve replacement soon, your mother's odds drop significantly. I know you're aware of the cost." I nodded, my throat tight. I'd already seen the estimate, a number so high it may as well have been in another currency. I told him I was working on it, which was technically true. I just didn't know how. That night, I told Claire about the conversation. We were sitting in her small kitchen, the walls painted in soft beige, a chipped mug of tea between us. She listened, her eyes wide, her lips pressed together in what I assumed was sympathy. When I finished, she reached out and put her hand over mine. "I'm so sorry, Nathan," she said. "I can't imagine what you're going through." It was the perfect moment for her to offer help, even just to say she'd try to connect me with someone who could. But she didn't. Instead, she shifted the topic to how stressful her photography work had been lately, how a client had canceled last minute, how she was worried about paying her own bills. I remember staring at her, then wondering how two people could be in the same room, yet live in entirely different worlds. Still, I didn't push. I'd never been the kind of person to ask for money, even from someone I trusted. And in my mind, Claire wasn't obligated to help me. That didn't mean I wasn't hurt that she didn't try. A few days later, the burden grew heavier. My mother's medication needed an urgent refill, the kind of drug that isn't covered, unless you're willing to wait weeks for insurance approval. The pharmacist told me it would be nearly $400 out of pocket. I didn't hesitate. I handed over my debit card, pretending I wasn't thinking about the fact that my account balance would now barely cover groceries. That night, I skipped dinner and buried myself in work. Claire called, but I let it go to voicemail. I didn't trust myself to speak without letting the frustration seep through. The next day, she sent me a picture of herself sitting in the sun at a rooftop cafe, latte in hand. The caption read, "Self-Care Day." I stared at it for a long time. Self-Care Day. The words felt like a slap, though I couldn't exactly explain why. She wasn't responsible for my pain, but she also wasn't blind to it. And yet here, she was living untouched by the storm. I was barely surviving. It wasn't jealousy. It was something else, a slow awareness that I was fighting for my mother's life alone, while the person I thought cared about me was just watching. The shift between us was subtle, but I felt it in my bones. I started noticing more details: how she always paid in cash when we went out, how her clothes never showed signs of wear, how she sometimes used phrases I'd only heard in circles far wealthier than mine. And then there was the night she canceled dinner with me, saying she wasn't feeling well. Later, I saw a photo on her social media, her at a gallery opening, champagne in hand, wearing a black dress that looked tailored to her frame. I didn't confront her, not yet, but the unease had taken root and it was growing fast. What I didn't know then was that the truth wasn't just going to hurt me, it was going to make me question every moment we'd shared. And once it came out, there'd be no going back. The first undeniable crack appeared on an overcast Saturday morning. I'd spent the night at the hospital after my mother suffered another scare, her heart rate spiking, nurses rushing in with clipped voices and urgent hands. By the time things stabilized, I was running on nothing but stale coffee and the shaky relief that she was still alive. Claire texted me around 10 a.m. "Come over, I'll make you breakfast." It sounded like exactly what I needed, a small island of comfort in a relentless ocean. When I arrived at her apartment, she greeted me in soft leggings and an oversized sweater, her hair loose and damp from a shower. She smiled warmly, but something in her eyes flickered when I stepped inside, as though she was hiding a thought she didn't want me to see. We ate quietly at her small table, scrambled eggs, toast, and a fruit salad that looked too perfectly arranged to be casual. I told her about the night at the hospital, and she listened, nodding at the right times, but her gaze seemed to drift now and then, like part of her mind was elsewhere. It was when I was helping her clear the dishes that I noticed the envelope. It was sitting halfway under a stack of magazines on the counter, cream-colored with embossed lettering along the edge. I wouldn't have looked twice if the name on the return address hadn't caught my eye, the Greenleaf Foundation. I knew that name. It was a private philanthropic organization that hosted lavish charity galas, the kind of events that made headlines in society pages. My design work had once brushed up against their branding. Their invitations alone cost more than my monthly rent. Before I could say anything, Claire slid the envelope under the magazines and changed the subject, asking if I wanted more coffee. It was such a small moment, but it landed in my gut like a warning bell. The rest of the day passed in a haze, but my mind kept circling back to that envelope. I told myself there were 100 explanations. Maybe she volunteered there. Maybe she had a friend on the inside. But deep down, I knew I was collecting puzzle pieces, and they were starting to form a picture I wasn't sure I wanted to see. 2 days later, another piece fell into place, and this time I didn't find it myself. I was on my lunch break sitting in a park near one of my clients' offices when my phone buzzed with a message from my friend Marcus. It was a photo. "Isn't this your girl?" he wrote. The picture showed Claire stepping out of a sleek black town car in front of the Marlowe Hotel, the kind of place where even a standard room costs more than my monthly grocery budget. She was dressed in a pale blue dress and heels, her hair styled in loose waves. Even from the grainy zoom of Marcus's phone camera, she looked expensive. My thumbs hovered over the screen, unsure how to respond. Eventually I typed, "Yeah." "Where was this?" Marcus replied, "Downtown. Yesterday evening." She was with a couple of older people, looked like business or family. I stared at the screen so long the phone went dark in my hands. That evening, when I asked Claire about it, she didn't miss a beat. She laughed lightly and said, "Oh, that was just a friend's car." They were giving me a ride after a quick meeting. Her tone was breezy, dismissive, but there was a stiffness in her shoulders, the kind you can only see if you know someone well enough. I let it drop in the moment, but my chest felt heavier than it had in weeks. From then on, the contradictions were impossible to ignore. She'd claim she was just scraping by, yet she'd cancel plans because she was busy with work only for her social media to show her at a wine tasting or a boutique opening. She never talked about her family unless it was vague. "They live up north," or "we don't see each other much," but her phone buzzed constantly with messages from names I didn't recognize. The most jarring moment came one Friday night when we went out for dinner. She insisted we try a new Italian place I'd never heard of. The menu had no prices listed. My stomach dropped when I saw the wine list. The cheapest glass cost more than I'd spend on a week's groceries. When the check came, I reached for my wallet ready to offer to split, but she waved me off and paid in cash, crisp bills folded neatly like she carried them for exactly this reason. On the walk back to her apartment, I finally asked Claire, "Are you sure you're not holding something back from me?" She froze mid-step. The smile on her face faltered for a fraction of a second before she laughed, shaking her head. "Nathan, you've been under so much stress. I get it. But no, I'm just me. What you see is what you get." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But that night, lying in my bed, I realized I didn't know what just me meant anymore. And somewhere deep in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered, "You're about to find out. If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know." The real turning point came on a night when I wasn't even looking for answers. It was mid-November, one of those cold evenings where the wind cuts through your clothes, no matter how tightly you wrap your coat. My mother had just been moved into the ICU for closer monitoring, and the weight of that reality pressed on me like a vice. I was walking home from the hospital, head down, hands jammed into my pockets, when my phone buzzed. It was Marcus again. No message this time, just a video. I tapped it open, the street lamp light flickering over my shoulder as I watched. The shaky footage showed a stretch of sidewalk outside a high-end boutique downtown. There was Claire, unmistakable even from a distance, stepping out of the same sleek black town car Marcus had spotted her in before. She was wearing an emerald green dress that clung to her like it was made for her, because it probably was. Beside her stood an older man in an impeccably tailored suit and a woman dripping with diamond jewelry. Claire laughed at something the man said, then slipped her arm through his as they walked inside. The video cut off there, but I just stood on the sidewalk, the city's noise dull in my ears. Marcus followed up with a text, "Saw her while I was grabbing takeout. Thought you'd want to know." I didn't reply, not to him, not to anyone. Instead, I went home, sat at my kitchen table, and tried to convince myself there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe it was work, maybe they were clients, maybe, but the truth was already gnawing at me. I just wasn't ready to let it in. 2 days later, I couldn't avoid it anymore. I was at the hospital cafeteria sipping burnt coffee and pretending to review a client's mock-ups on my laptop when my friend Leah slid into the seat across from me. She was a nurse on another floor, and she'd known me and my mom for years. "You didn't tell me your girlfriend was loaded," she said, casually biting into a granola bar. I blinked. "What Claire?" she said, like it was obvious. "I saw her name in a feature article in Harper and Stone last month, something about the next generation of philanthropists. She's the daughter of Richard and Elaine Whitford. You know Whitford International." I knew. Everyone knew. The Whitford family name was printed on half the city's high-profile charity buildings. Leah tilted her head when I didn't answer. "You didn't know?" I swallowed hard. "No, I didn't." She frowned, then shrugged, clearly realizing she'd said too much. "Sorry, I just assumed." The rest of the day passed in a blur. My brain replayed every moment I'd ever had with Claire, every time she'd claimed she was struggling or scraping by, every moment she'd watched me drowning in bills without reaching for the life raft she'd clearly had all along. By the time I left the hospital that night, I was vibrating with a mix of anger and disbelief. I didn't even text her. I just walked the 15 minutes to her apartment, my fists jammed in my pockets, my breath coming out in visible clouds. When she opened the door, her smile faltered instantly. "Nathan, what's wrong?" I stepped inside the warmth of her apartment, feeling almost obscene after the sterile cold of the hospital. "I ran into someone today," I said, my voice tight. "They told me something interesting about you." She crossed her arms, her expression carefully neutral. "Oh, that you're not just some struggling photographer. That you're the daughter of Richard and Elaine Whitford." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't look surprised. She sighed like this was a conversation she'd been expecting. "Okay. Yes, that's true." I stared at her, waiting for the rest. She moved to the couch, sitting with her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I didn't tell you because I've had people in the past only date me for my money. I wanted to know that you cared about me, not my bank account. I didn't want to scare you off or attract the wrong kind of attention." My laugh came out hollow. "So you lied. While my mom was in critical condition, while I was scraping together every cent I had, you sat there and pretended you couldn't help." Her eyes widened. "Nathan, it wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." I cut in. "You tested me, like I'm some kind of experiment, and you chose the absolute worst time to do it." She flinched, but her voice stayed steady. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I thought, if we got through this without money being part of it, then we'd know it was real." I stared at her for a long time, my chest aching with a kind of betrayal I didn't even have words for. "You don't get to measure someone's love while they're gasping for air, Claire. That's not a test. That's cruelty." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. I left her apartment without another word, my hands trembling as I shoved them into my pockets. Out on the street, the cold air hit me like a slap. I thought that was the worst of it, but the truth, the cruelest part of her test, hadn't even surfaced yet. 3 days after that confrontation, my life reached the point where I didn't have the luxury of thinking about Claire's secrets anymore. It was 11:17 p.m. when my phone rang, the hospital's number flashing across the screen. My stomach dropped before I even answered. Mr. Cole, the nurse said, her voice professional but urgent, your mother's condition has worsened. The doctors recommend moving forward with the valve replacement surgery immediately. We'll need a payment authorization to proceed. For a second, my brain refused to process the words. How much, I asked, though I already knew it wouldn't be something I could just hand over. Her voice softened slightly, but the number she gave me may as well have been a brick to the skull, tens of thousands of dollars due. Now if we wanted the surgery to start tonight. I stood there in my tiny apartment, my laptop still open on the kitchen table, half-finished designs glowing on the screen. Outside, the city kept moving, cars hissing past in the rain, while my world narrowed to that phone call and the knowledge that my mother's life was on a countdown. We can give you some time to arrange payment, the nurse continued, but we need an answer quickly. I hung up and immediately started calling everyone I knew. Friends, old colleagues, even one of my most demanding clients. Most didn't pick up. Those who did offered sympathy but couldn't come close to the amount I needed. Finally, at 12:04 a.m., I called Claire. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright, almost distracted. Nathan, I can't really talk right now. I'm in the middle of something. It's my mom, I said, my voice sharp. She needs the surgery tonight. They need payment now, or they won't proceed. There was a pause long enough for me to hear music and laughter in the background. Oh my God, Nathan, that's awful. But I'm at a friend's event right now. Can we talk about this in the morning? Morning, I repeated the word, catching in my throat like a splinter. Claire, they might not have a morning for her. I know She broke off her tone, turning defensive. This isn't something you can just spring on me, and I don't carry that kind of money around. Even if I wanted to help, it's not that simple. Not that simple. I could feel my pulse in my ears. You've had weeks, months to tell me the truth. You could have been prepared to help. You could have said something. Instead, you're at a party. That's not fair, she said sharply. This is exactly why I didn't want money to be part of this. I didn't want things to get messy. I almost laughed, the sound brittle, jagged, messy. My mother might die tonight, Claire. It doesn't get messier than that. The silence on the line was colder than the rain hitting my windows. Finally, she said, I'm sorry. I can't do this right now, and hung up. For a long moment, I just stood there, phone in my hand, staring at nothing. Then I moved. I tore through every drawer, every old box, looking for anything I could pawn, my DSLR camera, a couple of rare design books, even my wristwatch. I sold my graphics tablet to an old classmate for a fraction of its value. By 2:30 a.m., I'd scraped together enough to cover the initial deposit the hospital needed to begin. When I arrived at the hospital, soaked through from the rain, they took the payment and wheeled my mother into surgery. I sat in the waiting room, my wet jacket clinging to my skin, my hands clenched so tightly the knuckles ached. Claire didn't call. She didn't text. Not that night. Not the next day. I didn't know if it was cowardice guilt or simply the fact that her test had already given her the answer she wanted, that I would never put money above love even if it killed me. But what she didn't know was that I'd stopped caring about passing her test. I was already planning how I'd end it, and when I did, I wasn't going to just walk away. I was going to make her see exactly what it felt like to be powerless. It was 4 days after my mother's surgery when the next crack in Claire's facade appeared, this time so sharp it nearly split the whole thing open. By then my mother was in recovery, the worst danger past. I was still exhausted, still drowning in debt from the procedure, but at least I could breathe without feeling like the walls were closing in. My phone sat stubbornly silent when it came to Claire, and I told myself I didn't care. I had more important things to focus on. But when her name finally lit up my screen that Friday evening, I hesitated. Hey, can we talk? A saner man might have ignored it. Instead, I found myself walking to her apartment an hour later, my mind running through what I'd say. I wanted to look her in the eye and make her understand what her absence had done to me, and maybe hear her try to explain it. When I arrived, she wasn't there. Her neighbor said she'd just stepped out and would be back soon. I debated leaving, but my anger kept me planted in the hallway. She'd left her door unlocked, something I'd told her before was careless, so I let myself in. The apartment was spotless as always, everything arranged with a kind of deliberate elegance that had always made me feel like a visitor never at home. Her camera bag sat on the couch, the strap dangling over the edge. On the coffee table, her phone rested face down, its screen glowing faintly with an incoming notification. I didn't mean to pick it up. I really didn't. But something in me was tired of guessing, tired of piecing together half-truths. My hand moved before I could stop it. The phone wasn't locked. The home screen was a cascade of unread messages, some from names I didn't recognize, Aunt Lydia, Uncle James board dinner RSVP, and others from numbers that were clearly saved under titles, not names, driver, stylist, florist. One thread near the top stopped me cold. It was a group chat labeled Whitford Family. Her most recent message, sent just 2 hours ago, read, "Dinner with the Leungs went well. Father says the merger is moving forward. Also, my little real-life experiment is nearly over. Think I've proven my point." A reply from Mother followed almost immediately. "I do hope you've been discreet. We wouldn't want the poor boy finding out the truth too soon." Poor boy. I scrolled further. Weeks' worth of messages painted a picture I could barely believe. Claire had been updating her family about me, about how I lived, how I worked, how I handled adversity. She described the nights I'd broken down over my mom's condition like they were some sort of psychological case study. She even joked once about how I refused to ask for help writing "He's stubborn." But that's part of the charm. Charm? Like my suffering was just a quirk of personality. Then I saw the message that made my hands shake. The night of my mother's emergency surgery, the night she told me she was at a friend's event, she'd actually been attending a charity gala with her parents. A photo attached showed her in a floor-length silver gown smiling under chandeliers, champagne in hand. The timestamp matched exactly when I'd called her begging for help. I set the phone down before I threw it. My pulse was pounding in my ears. When Claire finally walked in 20 minutes later, her expression froze when she saw me. "Nathan, I didn't think you'd still be here. I didn't waste time. How long have you been reporting my life to your family?" Her eyes flicked toward the coffee table, then back to me. "You went through my phone. You lied to my face." I shot back. "You turned my life, my pain, into some twisted little experiment so you could prove your point to Mommy and Daddy." She crossed her arms, her tone going cold. "It wasn't like that. I wanted to know if you could love me without the money being a factor. My parents didn't think you could." "And now, what's the verdict?" I asked bitterly. She hesitated, then said, "I think you passed." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was shouting until my voice broke. "Passed, Claire!" I was drowning. My mother almost died, and you stood by with a lifeline in your hand and decided it would be more interesting to watch. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't apologize. "You wouldn't understand. People treat me differently when they know. I needed to be sure." I took a step toward the door. "You've got your answer, and now I'm done." Her voice followed me into the hallway, sharp and defensive. "You'll regret walking away from me, Nathan." But she was wrong. If anyone was going to regret something, it was her, because I had just decided exactly how to make sure she did. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the couch with the city's thin blue light sliding across my ceiling and replayed every message from her family thread in my head until the words lost their shape. Real-life experiment. Poor boy. Proving my point. It took everything in me not to march back to her place and set the whole apartment alight with the truth. But rage burns fast and leaves you blind. I needed something colder than rage. Morning came anyway. I showered, shaved, and walked to the hospital with a thermos of weak coffee for Mom. She was sitting up, color returning to her cheeks, her voice steadier than it had been in months. I smoothed her blanket, listened to her talk about the quiet of the ward at night, and for a little while I just breathed in the relief that she was still here. "Have you been sleeping?" she asked, seeing more than I wanted her to. A little, I lied. Her fingers found my wrist, light as a feather. "You carry storms in your shoulders," she said with that wry warmth she never quite lost. "Let some of it rain somewhere that isn't your heart." "Okay." I nodded. I didn't tell her about Claire. I couldn't put that ugliness in the same room as her recovery. When I left the hospital, my phone buzzed again. "Claire, I owe you a conversation. Tonight, 7 p.m., my place." I stared at the text, debating leaving her in the silence she'd given me. But sometimes the best way to cauterize a wound is to look at it directly. I replied with a single word, "Fine." I spent the day working like a man possessed. I finished 2 campaigns, revised a brand guide, and sent out invoices with a focus I hadn't felt since before the hospital swallowed my life. Every click, every careful line of typography was a plank in a bridge out of this mess. If Claire wanted a final act to her experiment, she was going to get one. On my terms. By the time the elevator opened on her floor, the sun was dying behind the skyline, and the hall smelled faintly of floor polish and expensive perfume. Her door swung open before I could knock. She'd been waiting. She dressed for contrition, white blouse sleeves rolled to the elbow, hair pulled back, minimal makeup like honesty could be painted on. The apartment was immaculate. Candles flickered on the console. A fresh bouquet of lilies poured sweetness into the room. It looked like a set, staged for forgiveness. "Thanks for coming," she said, voice hushed, almost reverent. I stepped inside and kept my coat on. "Say what you need to say." Claire's eyes glistened. She clasped her hands together the way you do before a prayer. "I'm sorry," she said. "Truly, I never meant to cause you pain. I thought if I could strip away the noise money expectations, I could find something real. With you, it felt finally possible." "You didn't strip anything away," I said, steady. "You just added lies." She flinched but held my gaze. "I've had people pretend with me my whole life. Guys who show up with flowers for me but hunger in their eyes for my last name. You're the only person who looked at me without calculating what I was worth. And to prove that," I said, letting the steel slide into my voice, "you watched me drown and took notes." Her breath hitched. "That night, your mother's surgery. Nathan, I panicked. I didn't know how to help without exposing everything. My parents there are rules about how we spend how we're seen. I thought if I crossed that line, I'd ruin us. I thought we could talk in the morning and you were under chandeliers," I said softly while I was counting bills in a waiting room. "You were smiling in silver while I signed my name on a debt that will follow me for years. Don't dress that up like panic. That was a choice." She wrapped her arms around herself. For the first time, the flawless finish cracked and something raw showed through. "You think I'm a monster," she whispered. "I think you never learned the difference between testing love and twisting it." Silence swelled. For a heartbeat, I wondered if this was where it ended, two people staring at the wreckage, walking away in opposite directions. But Claire wasn't done. "I want to make it right." She crossed to a sideboard, opened a drawer, and set a checkbook on the table with careful ceremony. "Tell me the number, hospital bills, debt, whatever it is, I'll cover it. No conditions." I let the offer sit between us like a glittering trap. It would be so easy to accept. It would solve 100 problems and create 1,000 more I wouldn't see until they were wrapped around my throat. I shook my head. "You can't buy back a moment you didn't bother to live through." Her eyes shone furious and wet. "So what then? You punish me. You put on a crown of integrity and leave me with ashes. Do you think you're the first person I've disappointed?" "No," I said, "but I'll be the last person you get to grade like homework." Her chin lifted, the contrition drained away, leaving the family steel. "Careful, Nathan. You don't want to make an enemy of me." I almost smiled. "You already did that when you made a game out of my mother's life." She took a step forward. "What do you want?" The question hung there like a cord waiting to resolve. For a second, I tasted the bitterness of telling her I wanted nothing, that I'd vanish and never say her name again. But that would leave her with the one thing she prized most: control of the narrative. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and set it beside her checkbook. The screen was dark, but the implication wasn't. "I want the truth," I said. "From you. Not just for me. For the people who drink your champagne and clap at your charities while you practice empathy like scales and call it music." She stared at the phone, then at me. "You recorded I don't need recordings," I said. "I have your messages. I have timelines. I have friends who saw what you didn't bother to hide. And I have an invitation." Her brows pinched. "To what?" "To Saturday," I said. "The Greenleaf Foundation Gala." The name landed with a soft thud. She recovered quickly. "That's a private event. You can't just—" "You told your mother your experiment was nearly over," I said. "Let's finish it properly. In a room full of people who think tests are elegant when the subjects are poor." Color drained from her face, then returned in a wave of anger. "You wouldn't. You once told me," I said, walking toward the door, "that I'd regret leaving you." "Maybe. But you're going to regret underestimating me." She followed, fingers curling and unfurling at her sides. "Nathan, don't do this. We can fix this privately. I'll talk to my parents. I'll make a statement. You'll find a way to make me a footnote," I said. "No, thank you." I opened the door. She caught it with her palm, the two of us not touching, but close enough to feel the heat of each other's refusal. "What if I love you?" she asked suddenly, the words tumbling out like she wasn't meant to say them. I paused. The hallway smelled of wax and luxury. Somewhere an elevator chimed. "Then you should have loved me like a person," I said, "not a project." Her hand fell away. The door clicked shut between us. In the elevator's mirrored walls, I barely recognized the man looking back, jaw set, eyes clear, coat collar turned up like armor. I thought of Mom, of her thin fingers on my wrist telling me to let the storm rain somewhere else. I thought of money, of pride, of what it means to keep your spine when your knees want to buckle. And I thought of a ballroom filled with people who had never truly needed anything in their lives, and how it would sound when the truth punctured their applause. By the time I stepped onto the street, the plan was done. Not rage, not a scream, a scalpel, clean, precise. Saturday would be the first time Claire saw me without the weight of her test on my back. It would also be the last time she mistook my silence for permission. Cho jengyo ti tong tin nai ko hu ish kong. Saturday came faster than I expected. I'd spent the days leading up to it in a state of deliberate calm, almost surgical in my preparation. Work kept me busy enough to mask the anticipation that gnawed at the edges, but every spare moment was spent fine-tuning what I'd say and how I'd say it. This couldn't be messy. If I stormed into that ballroom swinging, she'd spin the narrative in seconds, paint me as bitter, unstable, maybe even obsessed. No, I needed precision. I still had the screenshots, every message from the Whitford family group chat, carefully saved in a folder and backed up to the cloud. I had the time-stamped photo from her gala night, perfectly overlapping the moment I'd called her from the hospital. And thanks to Marcus, I had a few candid shots of her slipping out of that black town car, laughing with her diamond-studded friends. It was all ready. But more than the evidence I had, the one thing Claire had never expected me to have access. The invitation came courtesy of Leah. After our awkward run-in about the Whitford name, she'd been curious enough to dig a little further. Turns out her cousin worked catering for high-profile events, including the Greenleaf Foundation Gala. With a borrowed black suit and a catering staff lanyard, I wouldn't just walk into the event. I'd walk right past her before she even realized I was there. The night of the gala, the city air was crisp, smelling faintly of rain. The Marlowe Hotel's entrance blazed with light luxury cars gliding up to the curb as valets in perfect uniforms hurried forward. Inside the lobby was transformed crystal chandeliers, spilling gold onto marble floors, champagne glasses shimmering on silver trays, the air humming with polite laughter and quiet deals being struck in corners. I slipped through the service entrance, nodding to a bored security guard who barely glanced at my borrowed lanyard. The staff hallway smelled faintly of coffee and cologne, the muffled thump of music growing louder as I got closer to the ballroom. When I finally stepped inside, the sight was almost surreal. Dozens of tables draped in white linen, each crowned with floral arrangements taller than a child. The crowd was a gallery of wealth women in dresses that could pay off a year of my rent, men in tuxedos with the easy posture of people who'd never had to worry about a hospital bill. And there she was. Claire. She stood near the center of the room, a silver gown hugging her frame, her hair swept into an elegant knot. She laughed lightly at something the older man beside her father no doubt had said. She looked like she belonged here, like she'd never once sat in a cramped coffee shop across from me, pretending she was struggling. I kept my distance at first, weaving through the room under the guise of clearing empty glasses from tables, but my eyes never left her. Every movement she made was deliberate, poised. Every glance was calculated. At 8:15, the music softened and a spotlight fell on the stage. Her father stepped up to the microphone, giving the expected speech about community generosity and the importance of giving back. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Then he smiled and gestured toward his daughter. And now he said warmly, "My Claire would like to share a few words." It was almost too perfect. She took the stage with practiced grace, her silver dress catching the light. "Thank you, everyone," she began, her voice smooth as glass. "This year has been a reminder to me of what truly matters, not just in terms of financial giving, but in personal connection. I've been fortunate to spend time experiencing life outside of the comfort I've always known, and it's taught me the value of resilience, integrity, and love." I could almost hear the smug click of the puzzle snapping into place. She was using me, my life, my pain as a vague, sanitized anecdote for applause. I didn't wait for her to finish. I stepped forward, my catering lanyard now hanging useless around my neck, and let my voice carry just enough to cut through the polite murmur. "You forgot to mention," I said, "that your experience was someone else's reality." Heads turned. Claire froze. I walked toward the stage. Slowly, my phone in my hand, its screen glowing with the family chat messages. You forgot to mention the part where you let your boyfriend sell his camera and his work tools to pay for his mother's life-saving surgery, just so you could see if he loved you without money being a factor. The crowd was utterly still now, every eye flicking between me and the woman on stage. Her father's smile had stiffened into something harder, her mother's face pale and pinched. Claire's voice trembled just slightly. "Nathan, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I said. "You've built a speech around the idea of generosity. Let's show them how generous you were." I turned my phone toward the nearest table, the bright blue bubbles of the chat clearly visible. Gasps rippled as I read aloud. "My little real-life experiment is nearly over. Think I've proven my point." "That was you, wasn't it, Claire? Talking about me, about my life." She opened her mouth, but I didn't give her the chance. "And here's my favorite. We wouldn't want the poor boy finding out too soon." I let the words hang there, dripping with the weight of them. A murmur rolled through the crowd, some faces turning away, others watching with open fascination. Claire stepped down from the podium, her hands out like she could physically gather the moment and stuff it back into silence. "Nathan, please," I met her eyes. "You tested me, Claire. You lied to me, and you did it while my mother was fighting for her life. That's not love. That's cruelty dressed in silk." For a long beat, no one moved. Then someone near the back began to clap, slow, deliberate. A few others joined, though it was hard to tell if it was for me or simply for the spectacle. I didn't stay to find out. I left through the same service hallway I'd entered, the murmur of voices chasing me until the heavy door swung shut behind me. Outside, the night air was sharp, almost clean. My hands were steady for the first time in weeks. I hadn't just passed her test, I'd rewritten the ending, and now it was her turn to live with the results. The fallout came faster than I expected. By the time I woke the next morning, my phone was lit up like a Christmas tree. Missed calls, voicemails, and texts from numbers I didn't recognize. Marcus had already sent me a one-line message. "You really did it." Apparently word from the gala had spread overnight. A few small society blogs ran cryptic blurbs about a dramatic interruption at the Greenleaf Foundation's annual event. They didn't name me, but they didn't have to. Anyone in that ballroom knew exactly who I was, and gossip moves faster than fact. Around noon, Claire called. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. She called again, then texted, "Please. I need to explain." I ignored it. By evening, she'd switched tactics. "I can help with your mom's bills. No conditions this time. Just meet me. 1 hour, anywhere you want." I should have deleted the message. I should have told myself I didn't need anything from her. But the truth was, my bank account was still bleeding from the surgery deposit. The debt loomed over me like a shadow that stretched into every corner of my life. I agreed to meet her at a quiet rooftop bar halfway across the city, neutral ground, far from the hospital, far from the places we'd been together. When I arrived, she was already there, wearing jeans and a simple black sweater, her hair down in soft waves. No diamonds, no designer flourishes. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked almost ordinary. She stood when she saw me. "Nathan." I didn't sit right away. "Say what you need to say." She took a breath. "I deserve everything you said last night. More probably. She broke off, swallowing hard. "I thought I was protecting myself from people who only see me for the money, but I didn't think about how much it would hurt you, how cruel it was to watch and not step in when you needed me most." "That's one way to put it," I said, my tone flat. She flinched but kept going. "I can't undo what I did, but I can fix the practical part. I'll cover every cent of your mom's medical bills. No games, no conditions. I've already spoken to the hospital's billing department. I just need your consent to finalize it." The number she was offering to erase was staggering. It would lift a weight that had been crushing me for months. But my mind kept flashing back to that night in the hospital waiting room, the way the vinyl chair stuck to my damp shirt, the smell of antiseptic and rain in my clothes, the sound of my phone going silent after she hung up. That moment was carved into me deeper than any debt could reach. "I don't want your money," I said quietly. Her eyes glistened. "Nathan, please, this isn't about buying forgiveness. I don't expect that. But you shouldn't be punished financially because I was selfish," I offered. She winced. "Yes." I shook my head. "You don't get it. If I take that money, then every time I look at my mom, I'll remember where it came from. I'll remember the price tag you put on my life without telling me. I won't let that be part of her recovery." She gripped the edge of the table like she was holding herself still. "So that's it. You burn the bridge and walk away." "That bridge was never real," I said. "It was made of paper. You just lit the match before I did." We sat in silence for a moment, the city lights flickering beyond the glass. She looked down, then back at me with something I couldn't read. Part anger, part grief, part disbelief. "I hope you never have to wonder if someone loves you for you," she said finally. "Because when you do, you'll understand why I did what I did." I stood sliding my chair back slowly. If that day ever comes, I'll remember not to turn it into a game. I left her there, her hands wrapped around an untouched glass of wine, her eyes fixed on the skyline, like it might have an answer she couldn't find in me. Outside, the night air hit me like a clean slate. My phone buzzed again, but this time I didn't even check who it was. Some debts can be erased with a check. Others, you carry forever until you decide they've shaped you enough and it's time to put them down. And I had just decided. The week after that rooftop meeting felt like the first breath after being underwater too long. Not because everything was better, far from it. My bank account still carried the heavy bruise of my mother's surgery. My work schedule was still punishing every invoice already claimed by rent, utilities, or the credit card I'd leaned on too hard. And Mom still had months of recovery ahead, but the noise was gone. Claire wasn't texting me. I wasn't waking up wondering if she'd finally decide to step in. That chapter was closed, or so I told myself. The truth was she still lingered in the edges of my thoughts, not as the woman I'd first met in that coffee shop, but as the experimenter behind the curtain. I'd catch myself replaying old conversations with new context, realizing how many times she'd been watching, measuring, filing away details for later analysis. What unsettled me most wasn't just that she lied, it was that I'd been blind to it. I'd wanted so badly to believe in someone's goodness that I'd let the small red flags pass like background noise. It wasn't just about her, it was about me. And that's what pushed me toward the idea that began to form late one night while I sat at my desk, my laptop's glow casting shadows on the wall. I didn't need to hurt her any more than I already had at the gala. I didn't need revenge in the sharp, bloody sense, but I needed closure, something final, something that made it clear I wasn't just another subject in her social experiment. For her, this had always been about control. Even when I exposed her, she could still tell herself she'd proven something about human nature, about love without wealth. But I wanted the ending to be mine. The Greenleaf crowd already knew the broad strokes of the truth, but Claire's wider social circle, the people she went to gallery openings with, the fellow photographers she bragged about working alongside, they didn't know. They probably still thought she was the kind of woman who lived authentically, blending in with real people, understanding their struggles. I could change that without a single insult or accusation. All I had to do was tell my story in full. Not anonymously, not with venom, just truth. I stayed up past midnight drafting a piece for an online platform that published long-form personal essays. I didn't name her family, but anyone who knew her would recognize her. I described the first meeting, the little inconsistencies, the night of my mother's emergency surgery, and the gala. I included snippets of the chat messages stripped of identifying details except the ones that mattered. The title I chose was simple: I was someone's loyalty test, while my mother was fighting for her life. When I hit submit, there was a strange peace in me. I wasn't looking for it to go viral. I wasn't trying to ruin her. I just wanted the truth to exist somewhere she couldn't edit or bury. 2 days later, the editor emailed me back. They loved it. It went live that Friday. I didn't tell anyone at first, not even Marcus. But by Saturday morning, my inbox was filling with messages, some from strangers who'd read the piece, others from people in Claire's circle. A few were angry, defending her. Most were quiet thank yous from people who'd been on the other end of a similar test. That night, Marcus called. "She's pissed," he said, almost sounding impressed. "I heard from a friend at one of her regular haunts. She's telling everyone you exaggerated. But, dude, they've all read it. Even if they half believe her, they still wonder." That was enough for me. I didn't need her ruined. I just needed her image to crack in the same way she'd cracked mine, not shattered, just different in the eyes of those who thought they knew her. For the first time since this started, I could think about her without feeling my jaw tighten. She wasn't a storm anymore. She was just a cautionary tale in my life, one I'd written the ending for. One evening, while visiting Mom, she caught me staring out the window with a small smile on my face. "What's going on in that head of yours?" she asked. I shook my head, kissing her temple. "Just letting a storm reign where it belongs." And I meant it. It had been nearly 3 weeks since the essay went live when Claire's name lit up my phone again. By then, the whole situation had cooled into a strange kind of silence. My days had settled back into their old rhythms, mornings spent with coffee and my laptop, afternoons visiting Mom, evenings pushing through freelance deadlines until my eyes blurred. The debt was still there, heavy but not crushing, and I'd even picked up 2 new clients through word of mouth. I hadn't heard her name in days, which I took as a sign that whatever ripples the essay had caused in her world had either faded or been absorbed into her usual control of the narrative. I'd stopped wondering what she was saying about me. I'd stopped caring. At least that's what I told myself. The first thing I noticed about her call was the time, 10:42 p.m. Claire had always been deliberate about when she called, never after 9 unless it was urgent. I let it ring twice before answering. "Nathan." Her voice was softer than I remembered, but steady. "What do you want, Claire?" "I read your essay." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "Congratulations. You've caught up." She hesitated. "I thought you'd twist it more, make it sound worse than it was." "You didn't. You told it straight." "That's because the truth was bad enough," I said. There was a small sound, maybe a laugh, maybe a sigh. "Do you know how many people have asked me if it's about me, I imagine?" "Quite a few," I said. "I didn't deny it," she said after a pause. That made me sit up. No. I told them, yes, it was me. That I did it. That it was wrong. The words hung there between us. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. "Because I wanted you to know I'm not pretending it didn't happen. I can't fix it, Nathan. I can't erase what I did. But you were right about everything." It was strange hearing that from her, not the half apologies or self-justifications I'd grown used to, but something that felt dangerously close to acceptance. "I didn't write it for you," I said quietly. "I know, but I needed to hear it anyway." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of my refrigerator filled the gap. Outside, a car passed its tires, whispering over wet pavement. "Your mom," she said eventually. "How is she?" "She's better," I said, "stronger every day." "That's good," she said, and I thought I heard something like relief in her voice. I'll leave you alone now." And just like that, she hung up. No dramatic ending, no plea for a second chance, just a small clean severing of whatever was left between us. When I put the phone down, I realized my hands weren't shaking. There was no rush of adrenaline, no churn of anger, just quiet. I didn't forgive her, not fully, but for the first time I didn't feel like I needed to. She'd read the truth, admitted it, and stepped back, and that was enough. That night I slept deeper than I had in months, because now it was really over. Some endings don't explode, they just fade until you realize you've been walking past the ashes for days. That's what it felt like in the weeks after Claire's last call. There was no big announcement, no confrontation in the street, no mutual friends calling to stir the pot, just quiet. She slipped out of my days the way steam leaves a cooling cup of coffee, slow and visible and final. Life filled the space she left behind. Mom's recovery became my anchor. Every visit to the hospital brought a little more color to her face, a little more energy to her voice. I'd wheel her to the sunroom some afternoons, where she'd sip tea and pretend not to watch the nurses hustle by. She'd started teasing me again about my unruly hair, my tendency to frown while reading the way I still couldn't fold hospital blankets neatly. "You're getting your shoulders back," she said one day, patting my arm. "The storms are lifting." She was right. The tightness I'd carried for months, maybe even years, had loosened. I could breathe again without bracing for impact. Work picked up too. The essay had found its way into unexpected corners of the internet, and people I'd never met reached out with projects. A couple of them mentioned the piece, directly saying it struck a chord. I never confirmed I was the one in the story. I didn't need to. My clients weren't hiring me for my past. They were trusting me with their visions for the future. Still, every so often a thought would sneak in. Where was Claire now? Was she still hosting charity galas and gallery openings? Was she telling the story differently to her own audience? Did she think about me at all? The difference now was that those thoughts didn't stick. They came and went like passing clouds, shadows, not storms. One evening in late spring, I was walking home from a client meeting when I passed the coffee shop where we'd first met. The same rain-slick streets, the same warm light spilling through the windows. Inside, a couple sat at our old table, her laughing at something on his phone, him shaking his head with a smile. For a second I froze, not because I wished I could go back, but because I realized I wouldn't if I could. That table, that moment, that version of me, they belonged to a story that was finished. I kept walking. Later that night, sitting by my window with the city stretching out in front of me, I thought about what I'd actually learned from all of this. Not about money, not about love even, but about the lines we draw for ourselves. Claire's test had been about control, about setting the terms of the game without telling the other player they were in one. I'd been so focused on proving I could endure whatever life threw at me that I forgot I could choose when to step away from a rigged table. Now I know better. If someone wants to measure your worth in silence and suffering, the answer isn't to outlast their stopwatch. The answer is to take it out of their hands. It's not bitterness, it's self-respect. Mom will never know the details. I decided that a long time ago. She doesn't need to hear how close I came to drowning while someone who claimed to care about me watched from the shore. All she needs to know is that I made it back to land and I'm still here. And as for Claire, I don't wish her harm. I hope she learns something the way I did. I hope the next time she feels the urge to test someone's love, she remembers what it costs to test mine. Will she? I don't know, but it's not my responsibility anymore. The night she called me for the last time, she said, "I'll leave you alone now." And she kept her word. That's all the closure I needed. So if you've been someone's experiment, if you've been measured, judged, or pushed to prove yourself in the middle of your worst storms, let me tell you this. You are not a project. You are not a test. Walk away. Let them wonder about the ending. Write your own instead, and when you do make it one you can live with. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've ever been through something like this, share it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Ethan's Way for more stories that prove one thing: you can always take the ending back.